This is Dateline News and Conversation. Hold the applause for Trump, the Peacemaker. That's the topic tonight. My guest, a really good friend, really deep thinker, and an incredible author, writer, Ed Curtin. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Regis. Good to be here.
Well, thank you. Ed, you wrote another incredible article, really in depth. I want to go through it tonight with our viewers. You titled it, Hold the Applause for Trump, the Peacemaker. Now, everybody since Friday has been analyzing the smackdown in the Oval Office that President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance inflicted on Zelensky. And I think a lot of people have been missing what really is going on in terms of Trump wanting to be remembered as a peacemaker. Now, in your article, at the very beginning, you cautioned people when it comes to Trump's plans to end the proxy war against Russia. And you gave a little historical context. Why don't you explain what you meant by that?
Sure. What I meant was I was referring back to a move by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger back in the early 70s that culminated in Nixon's visit to China in early 1972. And it was an effort to split the Soviet Union off from China by befriending, in quotation marks, befriending China. And what I see here with Trump is a similar effort to cut China and Russia apart in an attempt to continue the U.S. project. I would call it the imperialist project against both of those countries, but to use this as a tactic as the Trump administration moves allegedly completely towards the confrontation with China. But I don't think the confrontation with Russia is going to end. The explicit war through Ukraine against Russia may, or the overt war will end, but not the covert war. I believe it will continue, and that is the plan.
Yeah. So to be clear, do you believe that this really is not a war between Russia and Ukraine, but a war between the United States of America and Russia?
Oh, yes, 100%. It's the US NATO war against Russia, and Ukraine is just being used, and Zelensky is the puppet, or let's put it this way, he's Trump's apprentice since he became president under the first administration of Donald Trump in 2019. And now something else has occurred on Friday last that muddles the water a little bit, but I have more to say about that also. But the article that you're referring to, I wrote about a week ago, before this so-called smackdown of Zelensky by Vance and Trump.
So, what would you like to comment further on? Let's not wait for that.
Well, let's put it this way. At the risk of sounding crazy, I think it's worth speculating or considering in a society of the spectacle, as Guy Debord wrote a famous book back in the 90s, I believe, or maybe it was the 80s, the French thinker, that everything is a spectacle. And this so-called smackdown, which from Bernie Sanders on the left, who is talking about we need to continue the Ukraine war against, or the US-Ukraine war against Russia. We need to continue it. Bernie Sanders on the left, or the Democrats, so-called left. And on the right, the Republicans saying this is wonderful what Trump did. He put this guy in his place, and Vance added to it, and blah, blah, blah. But is it not possible that the whole thing was a setup? Not just a setup by Trump and Vance to get Zelensky, but that Zelensky, the comedian, is part of the setup. In other words, that it was there's a script that they followed with that included the possibility of speaking off script, let's put it that way, and that the idea behind the whole thing was to perhaps push Zelensky out and replace him with someone else who would just be another US puppet in Ukraine, and move along without him. It sounds crazy, but it came on Friday, and then on Sunday, or last night here, it was the Academy Awards, and we know Zelensky is a comedian, and we know Trump is a reality TV star. And is it that far-fetched? Maybe, but it's worth considering. But all the press, international press, the Russian press, all of them are taking it at face value. But I'm not.
Yeah, and I have to wonder as well. I think I have to admit that I did take it at face value. But I don't think we can take anything at face value anymore,
Right.
because our heads have been spinning over the last several years with this overwhelming information war, propaganda war, psychological operations war that exist in a 24/7 echo chamber. And it's just overwhelming at times. So who knows what to believe? But Ed, I want to continue with the article that you wrote, because I thought it was really great. You said Trump, like his predecessor, Biden, who presided over the proxy war against Russia and the genocide by Israel, is no man of peace. And that was the title of your article. Hold the applause for Trump, the peacemaker. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean.
Well, what I mean is that Trump is he's all for savage wars against other people when they serve what he considers to be U.S. interests, or what the people who have him in office consider to be U.S. interests. Trump is surely not a man of peace. Just this weekend, for example, Trump, through his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, sent $4 billion in emergency military aid to the Israeli government. And since January 20th, so this is January 20th, 11, it's like 40 days or 42 days. He has sent $12 billion of military assistance to Israel to do what? To slaughter Palestinians, to slaughter Lebanese in Lebanon, to slaughter Syrians in Syria, excuse me, and so on and so forth, to be marauders throughout the Middle East. And that's just one aspect of his foreign policy. So he's not really for peace on Russia's western borders. And he's not a man of peace. He's a strategist, or his people are, and this is the strategy they're using now. So I think it's very clear. And then he put out that grotesque video of him and Netanyahu sipping drinks in a transformed Gaza Strip with a statue of himself. It's just grotesque.
Yeah. And I know it sickened a lot of people. I'm sure, well, I'm not sure. Our activist friends have been screaming about this ever since it happened, and ever since he was elected. And he said he wanted to be remembered as the peacemaker. And these people have been putting their lives on the line. They've been protesting in the streets. They've been jailed for being pro-Palestine and for pointing out that Trump has been supporting it just like his predecessor, and he's no man of peace. You mentioned the guys around Trump. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Sure.
You mentioned that a lot of people have said, well, Trump has changed since 2017. But I think you would argue maybe that he hasn't, because of the people he's gathered around him. You were talking about all these billionaires that appeared at the inauguration that have been appointed to either cabinet members or advisors. And then you said, would a changed man have Elon Musk as his right-hand man? But what really surprised me, and I didn't know, or have Vice President J.D. Vance, whose career has been backed by Palantir Technologies' Peter Thiel. Wow. Let's educate everybody who's watching this, Ed, because I had no idea. Maybe some of our viewers have, but I certainly had no idea about this connection. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Peter Thiel is another billionaire, a guy, Silicon Valley, who has backed J.D. Vance's entire career. Whitney Whitney Webb, very good journalist, has written extensively about the connections between Thiel and Vance, among other people. But Thiel is also connected to the Democrats. And so there is this interlinked group of Silicon Valley billionaires, Musk, Thiel, and others, who back both parties. And so that's what I was referring to. And they back Trump, of course. And they backed Biden. They backed them all. There's very little difference. I mean, many people have been saying Trump's a revolutionary. He's doing this. This is great. This is great. But with Elon Musk as his right-hand man, always dressed in a T-shirt like Zelensky. Oh, wow, that's a little weird. Little boy look. I doubt that any good can come out of it, because I think he's a very what's his name? Elon Musk is a dangerous character.
All right, let's drill down a little bit deeper into this article, what you revealed. Um, you suggest that both Musk and this Peter Thiel uh, fully back the surveillance panopticon that has stolen America's freedom and privacy in the name of what else? Freedom and privacy. Uh, J.D. Vance 2 weeks ago was Munich for the security conference, and he dressed down the Europeans for the lack of freedom and the lack of democracy. I mean, people have been commenting on that all over the world, both sides. Okay. But correct me if I'm wrong. Trump and Vance say they're all for democracy and freedom of speech. And during that smackdown in the Oval Office, J.D. Vance went on to say that we're fully transparent and we support freedom of speech. But at the same time, I have friends who are being locked up and arrested and locked up because they're out protesting against Israel and America's participation in the genocide. Their freedom is being suppressed. So, what are your thoughts on this? This Thiel and J.D. Vance and this total surveillance uh, of the American public and the denial of really freedom of speech. It seemed really hypocritical, duplicitous to say the least. Your thoughts?
Well, of course it's duplicitous. So when Vance spoke at the Munich Security Conference and castigated the European countries, uh, he was right in a way because the European countries were doing what he said. But it was the United States has been doing the same thing. And now, quite obviously under Biden, but now more surreptitiously under Trump and Vance, because this surveillance system that takes away our freedom and our privacy is not something out there that you can actually see operating, but it's part, again, of this deep trickery that is being played on people. So I think, there's a massive amount of hypocrisy there.
It goes a little bit deeper, Ed. And, you talked about the omnipresence of Elon Musk, uh, smirking, using digital technology to accumulate and exert power. Uh, I think a couple of days after Trump was inaugurated, uh, he announced I'm going to see if I can bring that up here, a 500 billion fund for artificial intelligence infrastructure. I don't remember the name of the guy, the billionaire that he surrounded himself with, but Elon Musk is obviously part of that. And how do you see that uh, in the digital age that we're in is going to affect all of us in a very bad way? I don't see it as a positive step at all.
Oh, it's completely negative in its consequences. So I agree with you. But it's here. Edward Snowden warned about it 12 years ago. Um, and it's much, much, much worse today, this loss of privacy. And I have written a lot about it, this new digital world. When I speculate about the whole smackdown of Zelensky, I'm drawing on all of that digital world that's been created with artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that it was used in those videos of that SmackDown. But when you know that this stuff is there and it's being promoted big time by all these presidents, and Trump most recently in January, uh, you know that what you see is not what you're really getting most of the time. It's like a Hollywood movie, and we're watching, life the movie, so to speak. And I've been criticized for this, but I think the cell phone is the drug that was given to people, the so-called smartphone, to induce them to enter into this digital world where there is no privacy and everything can be manipulated. And it's shared throughout the world. It's not just a US thing, people around the world. And I think it's a big mistake people made.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a smartphone. I use it, but I hate it. And I don't use it for a telephone. If I'm away from home, I will obviously use it to check my email. And because the video in these smartphones is outstanding, I use it primarily to capture video wherever I go, whatever I'm doing, to do interviews or whatever. But I am really fearful that this is a tool, an instrument that basically, as Snowden pointed out, has everybody under surveillance.
Right,
Everybody. And people say, well, I have nothing to hide. And of course, Edward Snowden rebuked that and said,
right.
you know, they're going to know everything about you if they want. It's easy for them to target you. So I'm concerned like you are, and I think all of this is very, very connected. AI, I'm just beginning to understand what that is, Ed. Uh, a friend of mine said you should download the app Deep Seek, and I did. And I typed in several things, and bam, it came back with stuff. It was really, really interesting stuff. But you know what? No sources, no footnotes. I mean,
Right.
I would like to know where this stuff came from. But what I'm trying to underline is how powerful it is and can be.
Yeah.
And I understand that you can use AI image. You somehow put an image in there and it'll tell you everything about it. And so, well, people are really enthralled with this, and lots of people I know are using it. I'm really concerned about the dark side of this. And I want to ask you this. I I can't believe the omnipresence of Elon Musk. He is out there acting like uh, a shadow president. I mean, even here in the Russian media, RT, for example, he's being quoted about even the removal of Zelensky. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on the omnipresence of Elon Musk commenting about everything as if he's speaking for United States my God, speaking for the president? What are your thoughts?
Well, he is. He's like his doppelganger, if I can put it that way. If I'm pronouncing it correctly, I think so. Uh, and yeah, I read the Russian press. I read all the press, the international press and the US press. And I see on RT and I think it's on TASS and um, uh, Sputnik News and, all over the world, people are giving great play to Elon Musk. And if you go to Twitter and look at Twitter, Elon Musk is putting out videos and statements one after the other in a nonstop, rapid fire pace that is just it's shocking. Shocking's not the word. It's it speaks volumes. Let's put it that way. And he was a guy who was using his satellite stuff in Ukraine to help the Ukrainians kill Russians. Uh, he's a guy connected to the CIA and the Pentagon through his electronic stuff. He's an outer space kind of nutcase wanting to send rockets to every planet out there. Uh, what's that all about? Well, that's all about not just cybersecurity, but weapons in space and so forth. So this guy is completely uh, military industrial CIA from the start. But now people are saying, Trump's a revolutionary. I watch these podcasts with people that I like and respect, who are criticizing and have been big critics of the US government. And all of a sudden, I won't name names, um, uh, some of them are saying, wow, Trump is a revolutionary. This is the best thing that's ever happened, since grilled cheese. Uh, uh, and I'm shaking my head. What? Wait a second. Wait a second. Not so fast.
Yeah, and you also wrote, which I really loved, you said, and I quote, such hyperbole is quite naive, as has been the calling of J.D. Vance Munich Security Conference speech historic and Ciceronian. Uh, you said it was a good speech in many ways, but, uh, and I agree with you. Uh, you know, uh, a lot of my friends, in fact, most of my friends have not bought into this new Trump. They despise him from the very beginning. They'll never accept him. But there are other people who are claiming it's the second come of Jesus Christ. I mean,
Right.
he's this transformational savior who's look what he's doing to government. He's rooting out corruption. He's rooting out waste. He wants to cut the defense budget 50%. And people are saying, wow, this is really great. And yet you write, this is quite naive. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Well, you have to go. I believe a great deal of this is theater, and that the prism through which we should be all looking is this theatrical prism and this society of the spectacle, and these people being actors on this political stage, and that uh, I lost my train of thought. Take me back to your question.
No, such hyperbole is naive that we're caught
Oh,
in this theater of the spectacle.
yeah, yeah, but take cutting the defense budget by 50%. Uh, well, he's saying he wants Russia to cut theirs, China to cut theirs, and the US to cut theirs. But again, it's not for some altruistic, even if it ever happened, altruistic reasons. It's a strategy to save money for some other purposes. I mean, he wants to cut social services for regular people and poor people, uh, and he's been doing that already. Is this something good? It's not. It's not. It doesn't make for a good society. It's war against regular people. But regular people voted the guy in, and regular people voted Biden in, and regular people voted Obama in, and regular people voted George Bush in. That's what regular people do. But they don't get it. It doesn't matter how long, decades of being played with, people still don't get it. They think Jesus Christ has just arrived. Some do in Trump.
Yeah. And you and I both have pointed out, uh, the failure of journalism, uh, not only in the United States, but across the entire West. It's a joke. They're merely stenographers for promoting the same propaganda, the same talking points. I mean, it's ridiculous when you look at it. You know, journalist after journalist, TV presenter after TV presenter, America and Europe, they exactly the same talking points. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not by accident. Uh, so, the role that the media has played has caused this. They've been part and parcel of the spectacle and have been dictating really the narrative. Moving on with this incredible article that you wrote is something else that is a topic for discussion and has been discussed. You wrote that you're convinced that the US NATO war against Russia will not be ending unless NATO is dissolved. Now, Trump has stated on numerous occasions he doesn't have a lot of faith in NATO. Uh, he's been claiming that the Europeans have not been paying their way. United States has been paying far more than all of them, and it's up to them to um, come to the table. They put more money in there. Uh, but you wrote, and I am curious as to what you meant by that US NATO war against Russia will not be ending unless NATO is dissolved. You think that's likely?
No, I don't. Um, what I meant was that the whole purpose of NATO from the start, following World War II, the entire purpose behind it was to contain and provoke the Soviet Union. And this has continued down through the decades now that we are talking about Russia and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the agreements made uh, with George Herbert Walker Bush and so forth that NATO would not move towards Russia's borders. But of course, the opposite occurred. They did. The US, through NATO, since NATO basically is the US, surrounded Russia with missiles, bases, military, soldiers, of course, and threatened Russia all around her borders. It would be the same as if Russia did that in Canada and the Mexican border surrounding the United States. I mean, we would never let it happen. But that's what happened. And the purpose of NATO is that's the only purpose. There is no other purpose. And it's been expanded and expanded and expanded. And so Trump now, he wants NATO to pay the European countries, the other countries, to pay more. He's a businessman, and he doesn't want the US to continue paying as much as it has. And that's all it really seems to me to be, and that NATO will continue to exist. And as long as it continues to exist, Russia will be threatened by NATO.
Yeah. And, President Putin has been saying repeatedly uh, when he talks to the United States, he said, you have to get back to the root causes. And you
Right.
mentioned that the broken agreement not to move 1 inch eastward of NATO. And Clinton immediately broke that. And now Ukraine, the intention was to bring them into NATO, and that was Russia's red line. Uh, but I want to make it clear because um, NATO's sole purpose has never been defensive. Uh,
No.
I want to clarify that. They've completely surrounded Russia, and they've been conducting war games for the last many years all along Russia's borders with tens of thousands of NATO, including American, Canadian troops, gaming a first strike nuclear attack on Russia. It's what it's always been about. I mean, going back to the end of World War II, Truman wanted to bomb Russia, the Soviet Union, back to the Stone Age. Thank God that didn't happen. The United States also had plans to destroy with nukes, but then they realized Russia had the nuke and that was washed. And so I think it's really important to clarify that the only reason for NATO's existence, and you wrote this in your article, was to destroy Russia as an independent country. You didn't say this part, but you said create regime change there through various multiple means, and those have been covert and overt, correct?
Yeah, definitely covert and overt. And now Trump says, he is dissolving, what is it? U.S. aid, which of course was at the forefront of this kind of stuff. And it seems, I say seems, as if he does not want to pursue those policies any longer. Uh, but again, I'm skeptical, but time will tell. I think these are just strategies, but perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know. I mean, if I just go back a second to the speculation I had about this smackdown with Zelensky last Friday. Uh, I obviously have no uh, proof that this is happened. But what I'm asking people to do, and what I think we have to do in this age of the unimaginable, is to start imagining these far out scenarios, because we're living in this era of total 24/7 propaganda all the time, everywhere. And the media, as you pointed out, are spokespeople for the intelligence agencies. And we have AI and we have all this other stuff. Uh, so we have to start imagining, putting facts together with the artistic imagination, thinking a little outside the box, and see where it goes. Otherwise, I think we're doomed, because we're going to, in terms of Russia, for example, now I used the term Trojan Horse. I think it was in that article, but there are multiple Trojan horses, I think, in the works.
Yeah,
And
no, I agree. Uh, you went on to say if NATO is not dissolved, the undermining of Russia will continue under Trump. Uh, and he seems to recognize that the proxy war is lost on the battlefield
oh
and that
yeah,
that's obvious. Uh, a friend of mine, she's going to be on the show later in the week, wrote this. She said, and by the way, right after the smackdown in the Oval Office, Zelensky flew to England and he met with the king. He met with Starmer, and then he went and he France and met with Macron, and then later people from the EU, and everybody hugged him and said, "Great, you really stood up to Trump. We're proud of you. You're a hero." Blah 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 blah. Now people are talking about what is going to happen to Europe, what is going to happen to NATO because of this reaction that the European, they had the meeting in London, they had the meeting in Paris, they're probably going to meet again, and they're thumping their chests, Macron and Starmer, the coalition of the willing.
yeah,
Where did we hear that before? Are going to go in there with troops and with air power, but only after a peace agreement is signed. How stupid and hypocritical is that? But here's what a friend of mine wrote in terms of Europe. The only way to restore Europe's geopolitical standing is to consider three unthinkable options. Now, this was not in your article. This is a friend, but it's relative to what we're talking about right now. Number one, Europe should announce its willingness to quit NATO. Some of the people in Europe are already talking about that. Number two, work out a new strategic grand bargain with Russia, because Russia is their neighbor, always has been their neighbor, and has always been a traitor and a partner. And number three, work out a new strategic compact with China. Now, this was to save Europe's geopolitical standing. I have to ask you this. Do you think that Europe's geopolitical standing, because of all of this war, the fallout from the smackdown, is really something of concern to Europe?
Well, it should be. Whether it is or not, I'm not sure. But it should have been for a long time now. I mean, it was obvious from the start that in Ukraine, Ukraine was going to lose this and was losing it throughout the last 3 years. But the U.S. press was and the European press was saying the opposite. I mean, just dumb stuff, but pure propaganda. But it was obvious that so uh, uh, I'm losing my train of thought here. If you could take me back to what you said.
Yeah, whether Europe is losing its geopolitical standing, its
Oh yeah,
credibility.
yeah. What I was thinking was, so Zelensky goes to London and he meets with the leaders there, including the king. Uh, wow, big meeting. Uh, and uh, but where's M16 in all this? Are they like independent of the CIA? As if these two groups don't work together and have been working together in Ukraine from the start. And so, where's M16 in this? Well, it's nice to meet with the king, and all that kind of stuff. But there's something very, very weird happening, and I don't propose to know exactly what it is, but there are games being played at very, very high levels now, and I'm not sure where it's going to
Yeah,
end.
no, I'm absolutely sure that there are games being played at very, very high levels. The CIA has been involved in Ukraine for the past 80 years,
Yeah.
right after the World War II, and they have influenced this fanatic nationalism and neo-Nazi ideology since the beginning. They've planted cells, resistant cells, throughout Ukraine. I believe they've planted some of them here in Crimea because for many years Crimea was part of Ukraine. Um, but I think what you said, there's something much bigger going on. And we are being entertained and distracted by the spectacle. And I was going to ask you before, but I'm going to ask you now. And the spectacle, who wrote the script for the spectacle? That's something hardly anybody's talking about. I've been ranting about this for many years now. And many years, many people think that I'm crazy or it's just another conspiracy thing. But this is not about the United States. It's not about NATO. These are all part of the spectacle, which you and I have been talking about. And the script has been written by what I will call for now super wealthy, financial, I don't even want to call them elites, but a financial cabal that has been responsible for wars and conflict, economic upturns and downturns for several hundred years. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. That's true. And these are the probably or their hench people who do the work, but they're the ones who dictate the script, I'm sure, uh, for everyone throughout the world. And it's always been a war of the rich against the poor and regular people. Um, I was thinking when you were talking about the CIA, a friend of mine, Doug Valentine, who's an author who wrote a book called The Phoenix Program about the U.S. Phoenix Program in Vietnam, which was an assassination program, CIA program run in the 60s. Um, and he wrote a second book called The CIA as Organized Crime. And Doug argues that that the mass media, the corporate media, they are, and the CIA are more or less the same thing. You can't distinguish them. You can't distinguish the Washington Post, the CBS, NBC. Here, I'm talking just about the states now, or about the European press. For years, we know that the CIA had their people planted in throughout all of these news organizations. And they have their people planted without in every agency of the US government. This happened long ago. So if you go to the Department of Agriculture, there's CIA in the Department of Agriculture. They're everywhere. They're planted throughout the government. And in many ways, the CIA and the NSA, of course, and all the spy agencies, the Department of Defense has a massive, massive one. They're working the script, and uh, yeah, I think it's the wealthy, um, the super wealthy, of course, not wealthy people. There are very good wealthy people in the world, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah. You mentioned Doug Valentine. He's also a good friend of mine. He's been on the show. And, I interviewed him in his home. My gosh, now it's like maybe 6 years ago, maybe seven.
Yeah,
And two
I
days
saw
of
it.
interviews. And those I've published, but I didn't publish them immediately because I was fearful that I or he could get in trouble. And I said, "Aren't you afraid that the CIA is going to take you out?" He said, "No." He said, "What they did is they destroyed me publicly." And they had a book review in the New York book section that completely trashed my book and it went nowhere. Uh, but I published, I think it's 3 interviews now, and one of them was taken out of one of the long interviews, the CIA in Ukraine, 80 years. Uh,
Yeah,
and I've encouraged people to read these books. Well, they don't have to buy his book. They can watch my videos for free. But, Doug was really, I think, incredibly detailed and accurate in what he described. And it really will make clear to a lot of people that the CIA, the MI6, have been at this at least since the end uh, of World War II when the CIA came into existence, but certainly developed these programs during Vietnam and have been implementing them really around the world. Uh, I want to get back to NATO now because I think it's really important. I'm beginning to see cracks in NATO. Not everybody in NATO is in favor of continuing this war, continuing the funding. Hungary and their prime minister Viktor Orban is against it. You have Spain, you have Italy, you have Portugal uh, as countries who are not willing to continue funding uh, NATO, Ukraine. So there's cracks there,
mm,
and many of these countries, including the big ones, UK. Well, UK is not part of the EU, but it's part of this calculus. France and Germany, uh, you know, they're pounding their chest. They're wanting to be the tough guy and go it alone without the United States. But this to me indicates some real fissures, cracks in NATO. And then when you look at the EU, I'm seeing the same thing. There are people in the EU that are not unified. They do not want this to continue. They're being accused of being fascist, eliminating political parties, overturning elections or primaries to elections. Uh, you know, the people across Western Europe, well, and I have to say Eastern Europe now too, have not had a voice. And for me and you, as an outside observer, watching this spectacle playing out in the EU of non elected fascist, I want to call them parasites, uh, indicates to me there's serious problems with this whole idea now of a unified Europe. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's true. I think there are cracks in NATO and cracks in the EU. Uh, I agree with what you just said. I don't know where it's going to all end up. Uh, uh, you know, when you said a few minutes ago, you said CIA MI6. I think I misspoke before. I called it MI16 or something. Yeah, MI16. I meant MI6, but uh, putting that aside, yeah, I think if some of the smart people, if they exist in Europe, of course they do, um, and have any power, they will realize that they've been taken for a ride for such a long time by the United States, and they've been, people talk about Zelensky being humiliated by Trump and Vance. The Europeans have been humiliated over and over and over again. I recently saw a little video of Macron in meeting Trump. And oh my God, he looked like a nervous boy. Um, he went to there was he was like clasping one hand, shaking hands with Trump, and he went to like do a double hand, two hands over Trump's hand, and then he quickly pulled back that hand, and he looked so frightened, like here he was. Then he goes back to France, and you know he speaks differently than he did when he was in the Oval Office with Trump. Uh, so maybe there are people in Europe who will rise to the top and say, enough's enough. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's been going on too long. I
Yeah,
hope. I hope.
here's what I think. Um, and there are a number of analysts, very credible analysts. I mean, in the United States, John Mearsheimer, uh, Colonel Douglas McGregor, Ray McGovern, Scott Ritter, who have been saying for a long time this war is already lost. Okay.
Right.
Well, who is losing? It isn't Ukraine, it's United States and NATO and all of Europe. That's who's losing. And so I want to get back to the deal because that's what Trump was all about in the Oval Office. I want to make a deal. I
Yeah.
want to stop the fighting. I want to stop the killing. But Ed, from where I sit in Russia and looking at as objectively as I can what's really going on in Ukraine, I'm saying Putin, and to use Trump's metaphor, has all the cards. Right now, Russia has all the cards. They could end this thing tomorrow if they wanted with a massive missile bombardment of Kiev, Odessa, Poltava, Kursk, whatever they wanted. They could end this thing very quickly. Okay. But given the pace that it's going, if no deal is made to stop the fighting, and Russia does not want a ceasefire by any stretch of the imagination, what
Right.
I think this is going to end is a complete and total surrender. Ukraine will have to wave the right flag, but it'll be a complete and total defeat of the United States and NATO in this proxy war. And then one has to ask the question, will the Europeans finally wake up? Well, will they get rid of NATO and form their own army, as many people are talking about? Will they want to try to reestablish relations with Russia, as does Hungary and Slovakia? And so I think, this is what I think is coming down the road. If we just want to look ahead a month or two or three, in the absence of a deal, which Russia cannot make, given their three main goals: demilitarization, denazification, and a completely neutral Ukraine, it means total defeat and surrender. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's true. That will happen if things move along as they're going right now. You said Russia holds all the cards. I was laughing to myself because that's what Trump said to Zelensky in that smackdown. He said, "You don't hold the cards." And Zelensky says, "Well, we're not playing cards." Um, uh, but when it comes to Russia holding the cards in the war, that's absolutely correct. But they've been basically holding the cards for a long time now, and they're not going to accept some. They'd be fools to accept. Let's put it that way. That would be a Trojan horse right there. To accept anything less than all of the demands that you just enumerated, and which President Putin has enumerated numerous times, and Foreign Minister Lavrov too. They can't accept anything less.
Yeah.
That would be a huge mistake.
One of the things you said in ending your article was, if Russia doesn't want to be tricked again, and they have been tricked many times, and Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul, most recent examples, but many times in the past, Russia should be aware of the possibility of a Trump Trojan horse. I personally do not believe that Russia is going to be tricked again. Do you think this Trojan horse, that Trump has got something up his sleeve to trick or trap Putin in Russia?
Uh, I think so, but I have no proof of it. But um, I think Putin's smart enough to not be tricked, and Lavrov, of course, as his right-hand man. These guys are very, very experienced, and they know. I mean, they know that in 2019, the new man Trump pulled, or the U.S. pulled out of Minsk too, and pulled out of the nuclear weapons treaty. So he'd have to be really a new guy here, a completely transformed person, to not have that Trojan horse somewhere.
Yeah, I don't think the Russians are going to be fooled or tricked. In fact, others have even posed this, and myself as well. Maybe it's the Russians who have set the trap for Trump and the Europeans. Oh, yes, let's talk. Let's get together. Uh, I do think it's great that Trump phoned Putin and Rubio phoned Lavrov. They got together. They've opened discussions, which is really great. It's a giant step back from nuclear war, actually, that they're now
Yeah.
talking. They're talking realistically about reopening embassies and consulates with full staffing. If that alone happens, I'm thrilled. But in terms of Russia setting the trap, days before the Oval Office and this agreement they were going to sign about Ukraine's rare earth minerals, Trump and Putin sends out the message to Trump publicly. Well, we're happy to have you come in with your companies, and we'll make deals to extract rare earth minerals together. Trump has got to be scratching his head. Wait a minute, who would I rather make a deal with Would I rather make a deal with Russia for all of their minerals and resources, or with Ukraine? And if I do it with Ukraine, that means I have to stay involved. I have to keep some kind of presence there. American companies and Russia. If you attack these companies, we're in war. Trump is not stupid. As a businessman, which deal looks better? Better
Yeah.
relations with Russia, and so I think that Putin has set the trap, and Trump is about ready to walk into it. Is what I think. Anyway, I want to end on this note. We have a couple of more minutes before Zoom. I get to my Zoom limit. Um, you at the very end um, talked about it's unworthy of good journalism that requires prudence and patience when the powerful pitch their deals. Let's conclude with that. The role of journalism and how we have been, I think, betrayed, hoodwinked, and drawn into the spectacle. Your thoughts on that before we finish?
Sure. I think a lot of writers, a lot of journalists jump too quickly to conclusions uh, without, being cautious. Um, it's one thing to speculate in a kind of uh, comical way, as I did earlier about what's going on. Uh, but saying at the same time there's no facts to support any of that. But you have to use your imagination, and it's another thing to come to conclusions very quickly about things. So yeah, I think it's common though. It's common. Um, so I guess that's about all I have to say. But I
Yeah.
wanted to mention, I have a new book coming out. This is PR for my new book. Um, it's called At the Lost and Found. And it's about a great deal of what we're talking about here and much, much more. Because as you know, I try to write about politics, but I write about art as well, and interweave the two because I think artistic efforts are necessary in order to illuminate social issues. So that's coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks at the Lost and Found. It's published by Clarity Press. Um, they published my previous book.
And it's available on Amazon, but not Kindle. So it means I can't get a copy of it because we have no mail service. I can't order books from here, but I'm certainly going to promote it in the description. I'll put the link to Amazon as well as the link to your Substack. And I want to encourage people to follow you for some really in depth, really brilliant writing that meshes what we're talking about politics with art, with spirituality, with religion. Ed, can't thank you enough. You're a hero in my book.
Well, thank you, Regis, and I'm glad you mentioned spirituality because that's a big element in my life and in my writing.